So today is Good Friday, but Friday was not all that good for Jesus. Yes, he glorified the Father by being obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Yes, he defeated the work of Satan. He fulfilled the many reasons that he came here. It was a Good Friday for those reasons. But if you read the accounts of Jesus' death in the Gospels, if you read the account of that Good Friday in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll see that it isn't all that good. Their accounts are filled with physical, mental, and psychological torture, culminating in the most excruciating of deaths, death on a cross. Good Friday is good for us, and it is ultimately good for Jesus. But what he went through so that Good Friday would be good was anything but good. It is the badness of Good Friday that was predicted hundreds of years before it happened. So tonight we're going to meditate on a handful of these prophecies. 700 years before Jesus was born, these last elements that he went through on that Good Friday were predicted in minute detail, starting for us tonight in the book of Isaiah. So to start, let's take a look at Isaiah 53:7. Isaiah 53:7 says, "He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shears is silent, so he opened not his mouth." Notice first that the Messiah would be silent. 3 times this sentence emphasizes that nothing would come out of his mouth. Like sheep who are about to be sheared, like sheep who are about to be slaughtered, he would not make a sound. Isaiah 53:7 also says the Messiah would be troubled. The word is oppressed. It speaks of intense oppressive pressure. The noun form of this word is used for the Egyptian slave masters and what they did to the Jews in Egypt. He'd experienced things that would cause distress and anguish. The word is used of the way that soldiers feel as they realize the battle is about to be lost. There's a sense of foreboding with this word. There's a sense of threat. It speaks of entering a time of intense difficulty and trouble. Third, Isaiah 53:7 says the Messiah would be humiliated. That's what it means when it says that he would be afflicted. The word is what the Egyptians did to the Hebrew slaves. They beat them down psychologically and physically. So he would be forced into submission. Pain and humiliation would become his food. It would be inflicted upon him. He'd be put into a humble, lowly, submissive position. Just in that first verse, there's an ominous sense of doom that actually increased with every word, but there's more. Psalm 22 was written 1,000 years before Jesus was born. And once again, the last moments of his life are predicted with astonishing detail. About the Messiah, it says this, Psalm 22:6 and 7, "But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me, they wag their heads." This adds another layer to what the Messiah would experience, is he would be considered a joke. This speaks of a verbal assault. This speaks of a firestorm of disrespectful language. So much so that he would be made to feel inhuman. He'd be made to feel like a worm. Mankind would scorn him. They would inflict disgrace and shame upon him, taunting him. His character, his words, his actions would all be looked at with scorn and derision. Everything he is, everything he did would be under attack. Verse 7 says that he would be mocked. The word means that people would have no respect for him. They're not going to think highly of him. They're not going to think anything good about him. They will express deep contempt for him as they ridicule him, mock him, make fun of him, laugh at him. Making mouths at someone means that they will insult him mercilessly. Wagging their heads means that they're looking at him like an idiot. Are you kidding me? As they wag their head and walk away. The sense of doom increases sharply as we return to Isaiah 53. He'll be considered a joke because Isaiah 53:5, he was despised and rejected by men. A man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Twice in this prophecy, Isaiah says that the Messiah would be despised or hated. He would not be seen as worth much of anything. People will not care for him. They will even hate him. As a result, he will be rejected or discarded. He will be forsaken. He will be abandoned like a piece of trash. He'll be tossed to the side as people move on with their lives. He will also, it says, not be esteemed, which means that he will be dishonored. What he will endure will strip him of any honor someone might have for him. Nothing worthwhile, nothing valuable will be seen in him. People will look at him and go, he's worthless. He's less than nothing. There'll be no high regard for him, no respect, no admiration. People will think very little of him. They will treat him as worthless. And so much so, he will be considered by them repulsive. He will be so repulsive that people will refuse to look at him. It says that men will hide their faces from him. He will be too repulsive for people to let their eyes fall on him. We can see the answer to why that would be in verse 8. It says that Isaiah 53:8, by oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, he was killed, stricken for the transgression of my people. The word oppression means that he will be subject to cruelty. There will be a barbarity about what he goes through. There will be inhuman treatment on a scale that is shocking, that is astounding, and he will have to endure that. It will be wicked and sadistic. It'll be monstrous. It will be downright demonic. This hatred, this rejection, this dishonor, the repulsion that people will feel when they look at him, it's not going to stay on the inside. It says there, Isaiah 53:8, that there will be a judgment, a verdict that will be pronounced on him and carried out on him. And it will be carried out in the most savage of actions. He will not be shown mercy. He will not be shown pity. He will experience a heartless, unfeeling, diabolical cruelty, and that will just be inflicted on him. At the end of Isaiah 53:8, Isaiah predicted that all of that cruelty would lead to him being struck. The context means that this word does not refer to a tap on the shoulder. This word refers to a powerful physical contact that is made with either a fist or a weapon. In this striking, this cruelty will endure until it climaxes in what Isaiah 50 verse 6 says, when it says, I gave my back to those who strike and my cheeks to those who pull out the beard. I hid not my face from disgrace and spitting. Again, we see that he will be attacked. The word for strike in Isaiah 50 verse 6 is different than the one we saw in Isaiah 53:8. This word means to assault. It means to beat. It's often used of the kind of sharp, powerful blow that deeply wounds someone physically and can even kill them. During this attack, he would be disgraced. He will be so brutalized that his beard would be pulled out. What an incredibly cruel and sadistic thing to do to somebody. We don't quite grasp what that means. We grasp the physicality of that for sure. But I read about a man this week who was wounded in the face and he died from his wounds. And the doctor said that he could have helped him, he could have healed him if only he would have just let them shave off his beard. He would have lived. But he refused because beards were seen with such honor and such respect. Men valued their beards, so to have it ripped off was disgraceful. And this disgrace would also be seen in that he would be spit on. And one of the worst forms of indignity a person can do to another person. So the doom that he's going to endure, have you been feeling it? It's just been piling one word on top of another. Well, what's the result going to be? What did all of this cruelty and brutality produce? For the answer to that question, we look to Isaiah 52:14. As many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. It says that many are astonished at him. The root of that word speaks of destruction that is left after some great disaster. It's the devastation of that happens after a tornado or hurricane. It's what you see. You just see utter devastation. That's what people are seeing. But this particular word doesn't refer to the devastation. It refers to the people's reaction to the devastation. They will be appalled or they will be struck with horror. Many will see him and they will be horrified when they see him as a result of the attack that he endures. That's because it says the attack will leave him marred, or the word means mutilated. Let that word sink in for a minute. People are horrified about him. People are horrified when they look at him, it predicted, because when they saw him deformed, disfigured, mutilated. He will be so utterly maimed by the beating that he endures that he will be unhuman. The text says that he's marred, quote, beyond human semblance, beyond that of the children of men. I read about an article, maybe you heard about it this week, about a model that was found like hours above where she lived in LA. They believed it was her, but they had to do a whole bunch of tests because her body had been decomposing for so long. There was no semblance of what she looked like before. This is what the Messiah would endure. A mutilation so thorough that he would be unrecognizable, and people will be too horrified to even look at him. Now, from these 6 verses, we've looked at 15 words. 15 words that describe a small fraction of the hundreds of prophecies made about the Messiah. For someone to be the Messiah, he would have to experience all 15 of these descriptions and much more. Now, since most of you are in the dark, I want you to listen as I read Mark 15. We're here this evening to remember. We're here to remember what happened to Jesus on the last day of his life, what we call Good Friday. Like I said before, it wasn't all that good for him. It started in the middle of the night. He didn't sleep the whole night before. He's arrested, and in the middle of the night, there were 3 trials that he endured. As a result of some of those trials, he's been punched in the face numerous times. As soon as the sun comes up, the Jewish leaders condemn him as worthy of death, but they don't have the power to do that. So as soon as they can, they get him over to Pilate and say, we want this man tried. We want this man put to death for blasphemy. That starts 3 civil trials that he goes through on that first Good Friday. The verdict of all 3 trials is the same. This man is innocent. I find no fault in him. But this didn't matter. The people were stoked into a frenzy by the religious leaders. They wanted blood. Instead, Pilate had Jesus whipped with whips that were nicknamed scorpions because on the ends of these whips were strips of leather and bone and rocks and metal that were attached to do maximum damage. By the end of that whipping, his ribs, his lungs, his intestines may have been exposed. Many died from the whipping because of how cruel and brutal that attack was. Pilate thought that would satisfy. Thought that would be enough. We'll just bring him out in front of the people. We will see how just utterly devastated he is, and they will be horrified, and that will be enough. But it wasn't. They demand capital punishment, and the worst kind of capital punishment, crucifixion. Pilate gives in to their demands, but before he does, he hands Jesus over to the soldiers. His soldiers. Much of these 15 words connect with the events that I just summarized. But all of them seem to be concentrated when Jesus enters the barracks of these soldiers. Pay close attention as I read the account of Jesus with the Roman soldiers. Mark 15, verse 16. And the soldiers led him away into the palace. That is the governor's headquarters. And they called together the whole battalion. As Jesus was led into that room, as he was whipped before, he's now being thoroughly mistreated. He is disrespected. He's degraded. As we've seen, he would be troubled. The pressure and intensity of the oppression that he's been experiencing that morning is climaxing, and he knows it as he enters the palace. Those soldiers are the toughest, meanest, roughest men alive at the time. They are experts at torture. They are experts at killing. They do not care about blood. They do not live in a sanitized 21st century. They are brutal. And they're going to take out all their brutality on him. And the sense of doom seems to heighten as Mark says they called together the whole battalion. That's 600 soldiers. Now, the word is used to refer to 200 soldiers, like a part of the battalion. And some of the soldiers could have been off doing their jobs. And so as you picture this in your mind, think somewhere between 200 and 600 soldiers. Right now, there's probably about 300 people in this room. So think about that. Put that in your mind. That many soldiers surrounding Jesus. Maybe double the amount of people that are here right now are surrounding Jesus. He had already been slapped, beaten, whipped. His face would have been swollen, would have been black and blue. His back would have been open, literally, but that didn't matter to them. Next, the soldiers humiliated Jesus. Verse 17. And they clothed him in a purple cloak, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him. This begins their affliction of him. Under their command, they're beginning to entertain themselves at his expense with a sick game of dress up. He is their defeated foe. You have to keep that in mind. They probably don't have any personal animosity towards Jesus. This is what they did to everybody. But they did know that he was considered the king of the Jews, and so they treat him like a conquered king. They're going to have their way with him. They're going to have some fun at this self-proclaimed king of the Jews. So they strip him naked. And they take a cloak and they put it on him, and they make a crown out of thorns, and they stick it on his head as he is a parody of a real king. Matthew adds that they gave him a stick, and so he's holding a scepter, and they are just mocking him. They're making him look as ridiculous as they think he truly is. To them, it was only right to humiliate him because he was a big joke. With the exhaustion, the costume, the blood everywhere, he must have been a pathetic picture of a king. They were having fun with a village idiot who thinks that he's a king. Yeah, you're a king, all right. This king was no threat to them. Verse 18, so they began to salute him, "Hail, King of the Jews." Here's the verbal assault that begins, the disrespect. They're meant to degrade him and dehumanize him. They're meant to show him, you are no king. Caesar is king. He is hated by these men. And their hatred mirrors the hatred the Jewish people and their leaders had for him as well. All were frenzied with hatred for Jesus. They said these words that we just read in verse 18 with laughter and looks of utter disgust. With every joke, with every smirk, they're trying to make his insides, his heart, his soul, his very core, they're trying to make his insides look like his outside. Battered, beaten, bruised, and bleeding. There was nothing valuable about Jesus to any of them, the Jews or the Romans. Without a second thought, he could be treated like trash and discarded. He was worthless, he was disrespected, and he was dishonored by thousands on that Good Friday. Then, what happened next would make people hide their face when they see him. Verse 19. And they were striking his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling down in homage to him. After the flogging, having dozens, maybe a couple hundred soldiers do what we just read to him would have left Jesus repulsive. To see him would have caused people to turn away because of the level of cruelty that he experienced at their hands. He was fair game. As long as they didn't kill him before he's crucified, they could do whatever they wanted to do. And since they're experts at killing, they knew how far they could bring him without killing him. They are like wild animals with him. They are savage and sadistic. They are downright demonic. They are heartless. They show no mercy. They show no pity as they struck him repeatedly. Blow after blow from hands and fists. These soldiers land on him. And then we just read in verse 19 that they took the scepter out of his hand and was hitting him over the head with this stick. Over and over again, they beat him. He was being attacked, and their sadistic play was not over quickly. This was not something that lasted for a couple seconds. Mark's brief, unsensational, matter-of-fact account ends with Jesus being disgraced as he is spit on, as they bow down before him and mock him as the King of the Jews, the pathetic, frail, exhausted, defeated king. At some point, chunks of his beard were also ripped out of his face as this disgrace is fully realized. Then, verse 20, when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him, and then they led him out to crucify him. After this vicious attack, those who saw him as he was led to the cross, he must have been a horror to look at. The whipping plus the beating would have left Jesus mutilated, utterly disfigured beyond identification, or unhuman. There's nothing good about any of this. This was the worst of Fridays for Jesus. But did you notice? During the entire ordeal, during this entire demonic episode, Jesus was silent. Did you notice that? Why do you think he was silent? What did it mean that Jesus was silent? First, his silence was a silence of judgment. He'd said everything that needed to be said. The Jewish people, the Jewish leaders, the Romans, all of them had already heard him. And all of them had rejected him. So in the words of Romans 1, God gave them over to their rebellion. He gave them over to their rejection. Their fates were sealed, which can happen if rebellion isn't stopped. Second, his silence was a silence of obedience. Philippians 2, right? He was obedient even to the point of death. He wasn't going to complain about his circumstances. He wasn't going to protest the wicked treatment that he was experiencing, even though he didn't deserve a single ounce of it. He would never return insult for insult. He would never threaten. He wasn't going to ask for help. He wasn't going to bargain for his life. He would accept everything. Peter says that he would keep entrusting himself to his God, even in the midst of pain, torture, agony, and death. And finally, he is the silence of example. He was, Isaiah 53:7, like a lamb that was led to the slaughter. Did you see how Mark told us that he was referring to Isaiah 53:7 in the soldiers' attack? Look back at the text if you can. Listen to verse 16. And the soldiers led him away. The soldiers did what? They led him. Just like Isaiah 53:7 says, like a lamb that was led to the slaughter. They led Jesus into the palace. In verse 20, they led him out to crucify him. With Jesus' passive, submissive silence in his trials, in his torture, in his pain, he is picturing the sacrificial lambs who are being led to the slaughter at the exact same time that Jesus is enduring this brutal attack. When Jesus first steps out of the shadows into the scene of history, John the Baptist proclaims, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." And he is in the process of fulfilling that example by being silent before these soldiers. What was not a Good Friday for him was the most Good Friday for us. By enduring all of this, he paid for the sins of the world as our substitute. This is what we remember when we take communion.